There's a particular kind of person you've probably encountered at some point, maybe in a workplace, maybe in a family, maybe in a friend group. They have a habit, almost a reflex, of cutting people down. A small comment here, a dismissive remark there, someone shares good news, and somehow, within seconds, the air gets heavier. The achievement gets minimized, the excitement quietly deflates, and the person doing it often doesn't even seem aware they're doing it. What's interesting isn't that this behavior exists. What's interesting is why it exists, and what's actually happening beneath the surface when someone consistently needs to make others feel smaller. Most people's first instinct is to label this as cruelty, or jealousy, or just a bad personality. And on the surface, that explanation feels satisfying. It's clean. It lets you place the person in a box, understand them as simply unkind, and move on. But psychology suggests that framing misses almost everything important about what's actually going on. Because when researchers began looking more closely at this pattern of behavior, the chronic belittling, the subtle one-upsmanship, the need to find fault in others, what they found wasn't cruelty at the center. What they found was something far more fragile. The brain, at its core, is a prediction machine. It is constantly comparing threats, comparing resources, comparing social standing. This isn't a flaw in human cognition. It's a deeply embedded survival mechanism. Social hierarchies, for most of human history, determined access to food, shelter, mates, and protection. Where you stood relative to others wasn't a matter of ego, it was a matter of survival. And the brain's reward system, the same dopaminergic circuitry involved in pleasure, motivation, and reinforcement, is deeply sensitive to perceived status. Here's where it gets specific. A study published in the early 2010s found that people who observed the misfortunes of envied others showed activation in the brain's reward centers, not in regions associated with complex moral reasoning, not in areas tied to empathy, in the reward system. The brain, under certain conditions, registers someone else's setback as a gain. This isn't a character flaw, it's a neurological pattern, one that becomes problematic only when it starts driving behavior compulsively. And compulsion is the key word, because most people experience flickers of comparison, moments of quiet relief when someone else struggles, without acting on them. The person who constantly puts others down isn't just experiencing these impulses, they're dependent on acting them out, which immediately raises the question, what are they getting from it? The answer, psychologically, centers on something called self-concept clarity. This refers to how stable, consistent, and well-defined a person's sense of self actually is. People with high self-concept clarity don't need external confirmation of their worth. Their identity isn't contingent on how they measure up in the room. But people with low self-concept clarity experience their sense of self as something fragile and shifting, something that needs constant maintenance. For these individuals, making a comparison that favors them isn't just satisfying, it's stabilizing. It temporarily relieves an underlying anxiety about their own adequacy. The put-down, in this light, isn't really about the other person at all. It's a regulation strategy, a way of managing internal discomfort through external contrast. This doesn't mean these individuals are broken. That doesn't make them victims of their own psychology with no accountability. It simply suggests that the behavior is serving a function, one that makes sense if you understand what's driving it. What's worth noting is where this pattern typically takes root. Research on identity formation consistently points to early environments where conditional approval was common, where love, attention, or safety felt tied to performance, where being better than others was implicitly or explicitly rewarded. The child who grows up in that environment learns early that worth is comparative, that the way to feel secure isn't to build yourself up internally, it's to ensure others are lower. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for impulse control, long-term thinking, and perspective-taking, develops well into a person's mid-20s. During the critical windows when these social patterns are being formed, that regulatory system is still immature. The habits carved out during those years run deep. They become default responses, automatic,
almost reflexive. And here is perhaps the most unexpected part of this picture. People who frequently put others down are often acutely perceptive. They notice strengths in others quickly. They're sensitive to social dynamics and shifts in status. They pick up on admiration, competence, and confidence in the people around them. And precisely because they're attuned to these things, those qualities feel threatening. The behavior isn't driven by indifference to others' value. In many cases, it's driven by an almost painful awareness of it. This reframes something. If you've ever wondered why someone seems to target specifically the people who are doing well, who are confident, who are liked, this is likely why. The threat isn't imaginary. From the brain's perspective, someone else's perceived elevation is a signal that the gap is widening. And for a nervous system wired around comparative self-worth, that gap registers as danger. There's also a social dimension that rarely gets discussed. Putting others down is, in many contexts, a bonding mechanism. Shared criticism creates in-group cohesion. Gossiping, mocking, dismissing, these behaviors signal tribal membership. They communicate, I see what you see. We share the same standards. We are on the same level. For someone whose attachment style is anxious or avoidant, this kind of lateral bonding can feel far safer than genuine vulnerability. It's connection without exposure. The irony, of course, is that this strategy tends to erode the very thing it's seeking. People who consistently cut others down rarely build the deep, stable relationships they're neurologically craving, because the people they bond with through criticism are also people they can't fully trust. After all, if they do it to others, they'll do it to you. And so the cycle sustains itself. The connection stays shallow. The self-concept stays unstable. The comparisons continue. Modern life adds another layer. In environments saturated with curated achievement, social media feeds built around highlight reels, professional cultures that quantify worth, communities organized around status signals, the brain's comparative circuitry is operating in overdrive. What might have been a mild tendency becomes amplified. The ambient pressure to measure up is constant, and for someone whose internal scaffolding was never built to be self-sustaining, that pressure doesn't produce motivation, it produces defensiveness. And what all of this reveals isn't that some people are simply unkind and others aren't. It reveals that human self-worth is, for most people, more fragile than we publicly acknowledge. The difference between someone who contains that fragility and someone who externalizes it often comes down to early experience, nervous system patterns, and the social environments that either reinforced or interrupted those patterns. None of that's an excuse, but all of it is context. If you've ever been on the receiving end of this behavior, understanding its source doesn't require you to accept it. Knowing that someone's dismissiveness is rooted in their own instability doesn't make it less sharp in the moment, but it does change the information you extract from it. Their commentary stops being data about your value and starts being data about their internal state. And if you've ever caught yourself doing this, noticed a flicker of satisfaction at someone else's stumble, or found yourself minimizing someone's success, that recognition alone is significant. The awareness that the brain runs these programs doesn't mean you're governed by them. It means you're in a position to observe them. People who put others down are not, at their core, powerful. They are, in most cases, people whose sense of security was never allowed to develop from the inside out. And in a strange way, the consistency of the behavior is its own kind of signal, a quiet, repeated broadcast of unmet need that the behavior itself can never satisfy. If this kind of analysis interests you, the way hidden psychological mechanics drive the behaviors we least understand, you'll probably find yourself drawn to the next video on why some people feel compelled to always be right and what that need is actually protecting.